Film, television, commercials, new media. You are listening to Producer's Pal, unmasking the business of filmmaking and sharing killer advice from seasoned pros. And now your host, Joshua Brown.
Welcome to Producer's Pal for a very special episode number 22. I'm Joshua Brown. Today on the podcast, indie film distribution and marketer Sheri Candler. This episode is sponsored by Indie Film Finance Guide. If you'd like to learn how to finance your own independent film, go to producerspal.com/finance guide. Okay, Sheri Candler, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for asking me.
Awesome. Okay, so Sheri, if you could just describe for us a little bit what it is that you do.
Sure. Well, I do a variety of things. I'm probably a multi-hyphenate, just like most independent filmmakers are. I am a co-author of a book called Selling Your Film Without Selling Your Soul that we're working on an update to, which we hope to have out in the new year. Taking a look back at some of those case studies and also looking at things that are happening in Europe, because we didn't really include too many European projects last time, and some of the new tools that are now available that back in 2010 and 11 when we were writing the book weren't available. I also teach workshops on using social media and on distribution for indie films. I also write articles for Movie Maker magazine and Micro Filmmaker magazine. I have my own blog, but also I work with filmmakers to help strategize their films, identify their audiences pretty early in the process if I can. Mainly, still a lot of them come to me after they've already shot their film and they're in post-production and thinking about this, but the idea is to get them thinking about it a little bit earlier and try to plan out what kind of content are they going to put out online, and how are they going to find people who would be the most interested in their stories and engage with them and hopefully have them be excited and want to help with the production's reach, beyond their own website or beyond a Facebook page or something.
Wow, that is exciting, because that's exactly why I wanted to talk to you, because that's the one thing that I feel like so many independent filmmakers are kind of lacking right now, is this forethought about who's actually going to see their film,
Yes, it's still becoming a great, a big problem that, and I think it's because many years it was never possible for them to do their own marketing, so they really didn't have to think much about it. They had to think, could I get a distributor interested in my film? And then it's their problem to get an audience to come and see it. And now these days it's getting harder and harder to get a good pickup from a distributor, and there are many more tools out there to distribute the film yourself and net a lot more money for yourself, but you can't do it unless you're willing to take on the marketing responsibility.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, so Sheri, if you could, I just kind of want to get to know you first before we delve into some of these topics. So how did you even get into this in the first place? Were you a filmmaker yourself? Did you watch Spielberg as a kid? What's the story here?
No, I did go to school at the University of Alabama studying broadcasting and film, and I studied a little bit of film, radio, television, production, that kind of thing, and I ended up going down the television path rather than the film path. But I still had to have all the courses, that a major would facilitate in having that in school, but really realized early on that filmmaking was not going to be my strong suit. And that I still liked filmmakers and I still like films, but that wasn't my talent. And so I also studied marketing courses just to have some, depth to the degree, and studied English and writing. I was on the newspaper staff and, did journalism courses and things like that in school. When I got out of school, though, I started working in television production in the local market. And then I moved to Russia and started working really in a marketing department of a cell phone company, a mobile phone, when mobile phones were first getting going, sort of in the mid-90s. the marketing part of it, I at first had thought that, oh, this is just business and it's kind of boring and it's not very creative, but marketing can be actually quite creative. And it's all still about communicating with an audience. In that case, you're wanting people to buy something, but the communications and the creativity that I learned as a writer for journalism, as a television producer for shows, does definitely come in handy for marketing. And I moved to London and worked in the marketing department of a broadcast equipment manufacturer. So it kind of married those two backgrounds together, that I, from the television side of me and knew what the equipment was about, and from the marketing side of me of knowing how to reach an audience and write for them and go to trade shows and all the things that go on with marketing. When I came back to the States, I started thinking really about what do I want to do, what do I want to do with my life now? And I fell in with a local film festival, and it put me back in touch with filmmakers. And it was about the time, 2007, 2008, when distribution started kind of falling apart, a lot of the specialty divisions of the studios. So I came back into contact with filmmakers when I started working at a local film festival around 2007, 2008. And that was the time when the specialty divisions at a lot of studios had been closing. But the rise of the internet and social networking and YouTube and Facebook and MySpace before that and Twitter started becoming more relevant. And I looked at it and thought, okay, if you have a hard time getting a distributor to help you, there are ways now that you can reach an audience directly. You have to work at it, but you can do it. Yeah. So I started talking with filmmakers about, helping, to do this. At first, I think I went to some distributors to find out if this was a skill that would be of interest, because I'd been studying it for a little while, trying it out personally to see how does this work. People have to remember that social networking wasn't started as a marketing tool. It was started, for people to talk with their friends and their relatives, and it was like a pen pal, thing. It wasn't a marketing tool. And for distributors at that time, they thought it was a fad, a trend, something kids did that wasn't very valuable to them. So nobody was really open to using them like that. And in fact, a lot of film distributors don't use it well even now. Yeah. But for sure in 2008, they didn't. So I started working directly with filmmakers who wanted to reach people that they thought would be most interested in their work, and figuring out, okay, how do you distribute, then? How do you figure out how to book cinemas and make your own DVDs and have your own website and sell from them? And that's kind of what I've been doing ever since then. It's a learning process. Every day, new tools coming out and new ways to communicate and ways to get your work out. Things like Tug and Gather didn't exist even a year ago, and now people are using it. But they're all contingent on finding an audience, building a relationship with them, and getting them to act to bring your film, into their community.
Yeah, I think that's the part that I really want to focus on the most, is that sort of first finding your audience and then connecting with them, sort of nurturing that audience. And I'm really excited to talk to you because, for instance, Scott over at the Film Trooper podcast, I was listening to his podcast the other day, and he goes, "Oh man, Sheri is like a marketing and distribution guru." And I was like, "Oh," and it just hit me. I was like, "Oh, I'm interviewing her like the next week." So I'm really excited because to have that other people's perspective of what you do, because you said, you work one-on-one with people and you work at the Film Collaborative. Now, your one-on-one work, is that through the Film Collaborative or how's that?
It's both. I work with members of the Film Collaborative who come and they want lots of advice on how to build their website, how to go onto the festival circuit, how to split up their rights for digital distribution and traditional distribution, and how to do marketing and find their audiences. And so there's somebody at the Film Collaborative who can speak to them on all of those different topics. I don't talk on all of them. We definitely have specialists, a creative director who talks about key art and all that stuff that I don't do. But the good thing about being a member is that you have access to all these people who have professional expertise. But then there are some people who come just to me personally who say, I have that other stuff under control, but I really need help on figuring out what's this latest change on Facebook, how's the best way to use it, should I be using Pinterest or Instagram, so having those conversations where I always try to bring them back to the thought of these are tools. these are not magic, and they're constantly changing tools. So first, let's talk about what are you trying to do and who are you trying to reach before we decide, is Facebook the place you should spend your time? And so I think that gets a lot very confused, with filmmakers, is that they don't spend enough time thinking about who they're going to reach and where they're going to find them, and then what tool will we use to start talking with them. They go straight to tools, and I'm like, okay, but who are we going after, and what are they likely to be interested in? Because that's what you're going to populate the tools with. So I think that's the most important consideration that filmmakers forget about, is the audience of their film. And, for bigger budget films, a lot of them are dependent on the names that are attached to their film, the actors, and things like that. But for smaller budget or no-name films, it means that you need to be part of a core audience, or know of a core audience that you can easily reach. So I tell filmmakers, what is the thing that interested you about this story? Because there's something about you that tells you who your audience is. And it's much more comfortable to reach that audience for you if you're part of them, because you know what you respond to. You know what kind of ways, how do you like to be communicated with? What events do you go to? Who do you listen to as far as influential people? What kind of publications do you read? Do you spend a lot of time on YouTube or no time on YouTube? All those kind of things start to help get a strategy together of how are we going to reach the people who would be the most interested in this film, especially if we don't have a huge budget to advertise our way out of it, or big names to hang our marketing on because they have fan bases that are going to come see this project because they're in it.
So that's sort of a classic way, that last part you mentioned, that classic way of kind of reaching an audience where you have a named actor or possibly a director. It's something the studios do all the time, and even independent filmmakers who have larger budgets now. But those larger budgets in the independent world, it's sort of shrinking. It's either you're extremely low budget or you're high end of the low budget, 20 million range or something like that. And that's where it seems like you're getting the names more often these days. So when I love talking to you because you talked about, think about what it is that drew you to the project in the first place, because that's something that I find difficult, is how do you find that audience and actually connect with them using these tools like Twitter or Facebook? Because you said, they're just tools. It needs to come back to the relationship that you have with the audience, and that's what you need to be cultivating. So how do you find that audience, and what's the best way to actually connect with them without just repeating yourself or continually marketing to them?
Right. So one thing that you're not going to be very good with on these tools is if you don't use them personally, because it's very hard to understand how to communicate on Twitter and how to communicate on Facebook and how to communicate visually, like through Pinterest or Instagram, if you're not using it in a personal way. And usually people's personal accounts, they aren't marketing. They are speaking, they are having a conversation, they are pulling people toward them based on who they are, what they believe, the way they look at the world, the things that inspire them. That same thing you're going to be doing, but it's going to be done in the name of a project rather than in the name of a person, because these tools are not about push. That like you said, you don't want to be on Facebook constantly talking all about your project, marketing. Good, because people don't like that. People don't like to hear that, but they do want to know that you have. You are in touch with what they're interested in. So it's something that may be around the theme of your film, but there's a reason why a story about the economy, or a story about Whole Foods, or the way the food processing goes in the United States, or the way a new video game is coming out and how it's caught fire, those kind of things, if you know that that's interesting to you, and it's likely to be interesting to the people who follow you and the people who would be following your project, you can use those as a way of communicating, getting a conversation started about this piece of news that has nothing to do with your project directly, but has a lot to do with the kind of people who would be interested in your project and are also interested in this kind of news. It's really more, these tools are really more about awareness to start off with, of that you exist, that your project exists, that this would be something that they would be interested in hearing more about because you understand who they are, not because you're constantly saying, this is my project, this is my project, this is my project, help me, help me, help me. It gets so desperate, and often this is also the case of why if you start your social networking too late, you get into that desperate mode. You're constantly talking about it because you don't know what else to say and you don't have time, to devote to really cultivating a relationship. You just want money, basically, or you just want, attention out of it, because you don't have enough time to devote to understanding what would get their attention, what would they be interested in that would make them want to talk about you, want to talk with you, stay engaged with your film and listening to the process. I think also a lot of filmmakers get a little egocentric, that they think that because they're putting a film out, everyone will just be interested in that. And let's face it, everybody's got a camera on their smartphone these days. Anybody could be a filmmaker. It's not that mysterious, to make a film. So why should they be interested in what you're doing in particular, rather than, hey, I'm making a film, isn't that interesting? No, not really. And this is another, going back to the names thing, it's really hard to get publicity in major publications without names. So what's your other angle? What if you don't have names in your film, why would somebody want to talk about it? Why would they want to give coverage to it? So another, newsworthy event would be a big premiere or a big festival choosing your film. Or, is there an angle that has to do with something that's big in the news right now? So this morning I was watching that CNN just pulled the documentary they were making about Hillary Clinton. Does your film have something to do with any of the topic around that? Since that's kind of a big news story, how can you pitch your story onto that story? Because that's likely to be picked up in a lot of, organizations. A lot of writers are going to be writing about it, and they want to have perspectives from different people. Are you a documentary filmmaker who also ran into trouble trying to profile a big name or something like that? Ways that you can get into the press without having a big name, without having big names in your project, and without having high-priced publicists trying to pull strings for you. These are ways that you can, and you have to constantly be on alert about it. You have to always be monitoring not only what you're doing in your work, but also what's going on in the world, because you're using all of those different connections to widen your circle of influence and show that you have a lot going on and that you know the interests of your audience and you know how to serve that interest. It's also a creative process. A lot of filmmakers are like, oh, this is, so burdensome to me. But in a way, this is a way to show your creativity every day. If you send a couple of good tweets or you make a great Facebook post, you're kind of, expressing yourself and your creativity in a small way, and it adds up over time if you're doing it, pretty consistently.
And you talk a lot about this this myth or this past experience of the disposable audience. You make a film, it gets pushed out with all that marketing or whatever, the audience takes it in, and then you forget about them. Or, you do a Twitter profile for a movie, and then, get a bunch of people excited, do your marketing push for like Kickstarter or whatever you have, and then after that, you kind of fall off, and then you made your project. So what's something that people can be doing to nurture this audience through, I guess, the lifetime of the artist or the entity, their film production title name? Like my film company is Fury Films, and we've got a Facebook page and a Twitter account, and I try to keep up on that. I really don't do that good of a job because I'm on Producer's Pal a lot. So what's something, okay. So for instance, I talked to Jerome Kroshan, who we both know, and he and I chatted a little bit about sort of the end goal in the social media marketing cycle, getting your audience to connect via email, like a subscriber list, because then you have direct contact with them. Whereas with social networks, you're pushing and hoping that people see it. So that's one thought, is to eventually get people through that cycle. But I don't want to look at them as just metrics and numbers. But my question is, I guess, how do you go through that nurturing process of retaining an audience and being generally valuable to them throughout your different projects?
Okay, so I tell filmmakers to look at what musicians do, because musicians usually don't open up a Facebook page for their album. They have a page for their band or themselves. And Amanda Palmer, would be an example of this. No matter where Amanda goes, whether she hooks up with a new band or she plays, on somebody else's album, she has an audience around herself and what she's doing. And I think she really tries to communicate with them directly, not feel like she's separated from them and I'll spit out news when I feel like it and that kind of thing. And they're disposable. They're just there for me to use and I don't have to give anything to them. Filmmakers need to think about that as well, to think about their own personal identity and what are they sharing with the world, so that you have your projects that are spokes around yourself, which is the hub. So when you're doing a website, I wouldn't advise doing a new website for every film that you have. Make that one page of your website, but the main website is you or your production company or whatever you want to call the entity that you hope to go on beyond this one film. That's the main, part of your where you're going to lie, where your fans are going to truly connect to, because they're interested in all of your work. Now, they may come into the hub from another spoke. They may come in from a film you made 2 years ago, and then because of it, they find out about these other 2 or 3 things that you have going on. But if you keep on, the same with Facebook, if you keep on building a new page or a new website every time you have a new project, you lose all the people from before because they don't see what's the connection between this film and that film. It's this person that's the connection. And so the place where they need to be connecting is to the person, not to the project. Now, this is very different situation than what any kind of film distribution in the past has been. There is no studio that has its own audience, that has its own email list, that they contact their fans, to tell them. Warner Brothers doesn't know who's watching their movies in an intimate way. So don't use that as your model. Use people who are more like the band mentality, where they're going to go on tour, they're having new albums come out or new singles now. They don't even have to have albums come out. They're going to be on a certain talk show or whatever, but they're building that audience around themselves and who they are as artists, no matter where they go, no matter who they partner with, no matter, what other projects, side project books or whatever they're doing, scores for movies or anything like that. Trent Reznor is another case of that. And in indie film, it would probably be Kevin Smith, would be the example that Kevin's into comic books and TV shows and podcasts and live experiences, and it's all Kevin Smith. It's not, this one movie and then that TV show, and then it's all him, So thinking about how do you build an audience around yourself, but that you're not separated from that audience. You don't hold them at bay. You must communicate with them. And more I'm seeing even Hollywood directors. Ron Howard has been crazy on Twitter promoting Rush, his movie, and answering fan questions and retweeting the fans. I don't know very many big Hollywood directors that are going to that kind of effort to have somebody come and see their movie, but he's not tweeting as Rush movie. He's tweeting as Ron Howard because his fans know who he is and know what to expect from a Ron Howard film, and that's what you want to do. Will you have millions to start with? No. Will you have hundreds of thousands of fans to start with? No. It takes a long time over, many years to get this done, but there's no reason to not start right now. You can't look at it from I'm not Ron Howard. No, you're not. But he wasn't Ron Howard either when he first started, so that's
He was Opie.
Right, he was Opie. And, admittedly, yes, when he broke into the industry, he broke in a big way, a national television show. Not everybody breaks in that way, but that doesn't mean that the avenue's closed to you. It just means it's going to take a little longer and more effort, really daily effort, for you to build up a sizable audience.
I'm interested, because you talked about the band mentality, sort of taking that model. There's the joke about bands being in the t-shirt business. It's that sort of that, you play shows, you build an audience, and then you sell merchandise or something to that effect. Can you think of an idea or situation where a filmmaker can do something like that? Is that even possible? You talked about Kevin Smith a little bit. Is there a way that a filmmaker can use the film experience to engage with an audience in different ways than just the film itself?
Yes, to build an empire, you mean?
Hopefully.
Okay, well, two examples. One is the documentary film Food Matters, and another documentary film called Knives Over Forks. If you look, Peter Broderick has a very good case study on both of those films on his monthly bulletins, where they talk about how these filmmakers went from making a very niche documentary with a very engaged core audience, but just because they were engaged core audience doesn't mean they were engaged with these filmmakers. They still had to go out and, make alliances and test the films and build up, partnerships and things like that. But both of those films, now the people behind Food Matters have made another film called Hungry for Change, but they're also helping to distribute films that are similar to that to their audience, the audience that they built up. So in a way, they've become another distributor, but a niche distributor. And not only do they sell films, but they also sell books, they sell recipes, they sell subscriptions to their site for extra content. They have live experiences where they do like healthy weekends, kind of a spa getaway situation, an experience, that they're selling. So they have lots of different revenue streams.
That's really cool. That's cool. But that's a documentary, and in my head, I'm thinking, well, if I want to do features, how do you do that? So it's interesting because it's sort of, I think it depends a lot on your product or your market. Who is your niche that you're actually speaking to? I think that matters.
Right, but going back to Kevin Smith, Kevin Smith doesn't make documentaries. So if you think about what Kevin does, he has, because he's so out there, Kevin is very candid, and he's not going to appeal to everybody, from his language and the things that he chooses to talk about, but he's very distinctive, and the people who get Kevin love him. And they'll go to see him, they'll go to support his movies, they will go to his comic book shop, everything that Kevin is involved in, his audience is also very rabidly, supportive of. So it's not impossible for you to do it. It's not going to happen overnight, and this is, sadly something that I find with a lot of artists is they're all very impatient and they want it all to happen, and they see somebody who's famous and doing well, and they don't think about the 20 years that it took them to get to the position they're in right now. But Ed Burns is another director who's like that, that he does a balance of his own small budget films as well as big budget films. I don't think it makes any difference that he's married to Christy Charlington. I've heard people saying, well, he's married to a supermodel. I don't think that has anything to do with the people who like Ed Burns' movies. But he, is very engaged. He tweets a lot. He makes personal appearances. He's pretty outgoing and able to connect with his fans. And so he, is able to create a sustainable career for himself. Now, I don't know that he's into books or live experiences or whatever yet, but this is also a new world where somebody who's very much from the old world of filmmaking, with Steven Spielberg, and he's an actor, is now putting his toe into what can I do to create my own empire and not be dependent on other people to bring my audience to me.
Very cool. Sheri, I've loved talking to you so much. What I want to begin to do is just sort of wrap up the interview a little bit, kind of put a tail on it. So what is it that you have going for yourself in the future? Are you going to stay in this sort of teaching, training mode, or what is it you're planning for yourself in the future?
Well, it's always difficult because I get all kinds of opportunities coming to me all the time, and some of them I filter through and go, I don't think that's going to be for me, and other ones, I have to think about. I'm just as much of an entrepreneur as what I'm describing filmmakers to be. I'm not somebody who's sitting here with a paid employee job telling you what you should do. I'm figuring it out just like everybody else here. So it's a combination right now of writing and teaching and actually doing what I write and teach about, and that's kind of how I see my future going. I would really be interested, though, in working with a distributor who wants to build an audience around their brand and helping filmmakers who have similar ethos to what they're trying to create to work together. So in the future, I can kind of see myself, as an example, I see Amazon Studios as somebody who might be open to something like that because they have lots of lines of business. But if they can marry the audience that they have for their consumer products with the audience that they could build for their entertainment products that they're making through Amazon Studios, and they have all this data where they can see what these people are interested in, and then serving to them what they're interested in. That's like an amazing kind of model, of selling not only movies, but sort of a whole lifestyle built around an interest group. That's what I'm interested in. I don't know if it's going to be Amazon, but somebody who's coming up like that, who's interested in building a whole entertainment destination where filmmakers are equitably paid and encouraged to be part of that community as well. So I don't want to hire somebody for hire to make me a film who doesn't want to engage with my audience. I want that director also to want to serve this. It doesn't mean they have to tell the same story every time, but that they understand the underlying core value of this audience and they want to make stories for that group.
Very cool. Okay, so you've shared a lot of advice with us already just through this interview, and you've even got a webinar coming up very shortly. But what is maybe the best piece of advice that you can think of for filmmakers based on what we've talked about today, and maybe one action step?
Okay, so my advice to filmmakers is that your job is not just learning how to make films. If you're in film school, you need to take some business classes. You need to take some marketing classes. You need to start thinking about who am I trying to tell these stories to? Because one, you may need more than one job when you're coming out of film school. And two, because that knowledge is very much something that you need as a filmmaker now. It's not just about story structure and how does the camera work and how is editing, but also how am I drawing the emotions out of a person when they're watching it? That tells me how I'm going to connect with them completely, not just for the film, but also in general as a person. So it's very necessary now to keep your knowledge up and take more than just filmmaking classes. And I strongly encourage people that if you have opportunities for training, for knowledge that you don't have, instead of poo-pooing, oh, they just want to get more money out of me, think about the fact that some of these low budget trainings, the IFP does trainings, the San Francisco Film Society does trainings, the LA Find Film Independent in LA does trainings, and sometimes local communities have these as well. Often they're very useful, short things that you go to for pretty low cost money to give you ideas, inspiration. If you walk away with one or two new things that you didn't know before that could help you, it's totally worth it. So I think that keeping up with all the tools, all the news, there shouldn't be any excuse for anybody to say, I don't know that term. Google it. There's this thing online called the internet. If you don't know the term, find out. Somebody has written about it or made a podcast about it or something like that. There's no excuse for not knowing how things are working now, and there's new developments every day. So you have to get in the habit of doing that research and keeping up on the trends.
And do you have one action step that people can take now to begin nurturing their audience?
That they need to be active on social media. I mean, I'm surprised when people say, how many people have a Twitter account? And only half the room raises their hand. The rest of you, I don't know what you're doing. This is not hard. So you need to have, not only have an account, but actually be using it. Because you won't be able to use these tools for your film if you don't use them personally and understand how people are communicating on them. And that's something very easy that everybody can start today. And really say to yourself that I'm just unwilling to do that. You're probably then in the wrong business, because this is not optional. This is something that you really do need to understand.
Very cool. Sheri, do you have a favorite movie, TV show, or even a YouTube channel that has you really excited right now that you want to share with us?
Orange is the New Black. I really love that show. I think I love it mostly because it's basically unknowns, and it's all women and all different ethnicities, and it's really well written, and I think that it's something that we don't normally see, and we aren't even seeing it on television. You're seeing it through Netflix, but still, that it's a really well and smart written show for women, by women, and that's unusual for right now, unfortunately. So I encourage people to give that one a watch.
Very cool. Sheri, if you could tell us shortly about your upcoming webinar and where we can go to find out more information about you.
Sure, it's being hosted by the Atlanta Film Festival, but it's anybody in the world who has an internet connection can join the webinar. It's called Distribution is 100% Achievable, but probably not in the way you think. And it's mainly for people who are interested in alternative, hybrid, or direct distribution. It's not for somebody who's saying that they're making a film and they hope a distributor is going to pick it up. I'm not going to cover anything about that. But it's going to have numbers, it's going to have budgets, it's going to have costs for different tools. We're going to talk about, the different aspects of windowing for films, theatrical, VOD, educational, alternative markets such as hospitals, museums, libraries, that kind of thing, the festival circuit and what it takes to get onto the festival circuit. I'm not really going to cover marketing. I only have an hour, so I have to really speak fast. But if you go to the Atlanta Film Festival website under events, you'll see the title of that event, and it's going to happen on October the 20th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. So wherever your time zone is, figure out from Eastern Time when it's going to be. But I think they're holding it to only 50 people. So you might want to, book over there and see, if they have tickets available still. As it gets closer to time, I expect that they're not going to have tickets. But it's going to be an afternoon where I'm going to have a section, and then you can send me questions, and I'll answer people's questions online as well.
Cool. And what is the best way to get in contact with you right now?
Through my website, shericandler.com. I'm also on Facebook, Sheri Candler Marketing and Publicity. I'm also on Twitter, @SheriCandler. And I have a Google Plus community that's devoted to indie marketing and distribution. We've got about 900 members right now, where I post every day just news that has to do with those two topics, but people, contribute lots of news and stuff there.
What's the name of the Google Plus one?
It's called Independent Film Marketing and Distribution, I think. I think I have it on my website, so if you click from there, it should take you directly, or you can tweet me and I'll send you the link. We have many times people communicating with other people and also posting new links to services and tools that they find interesting.
Very cool. Well, Sheri Candler, film marketing and distribution guru, thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
For me, Josh.